Good morning, boys and girls. We're going to begin our study on owls. Now, sadly, you know that our trip to look for owls at nighttime had to be canceled. It's too bad. That was going to be awesome, but we're going to make the best of this. The novel we're studying is called Owls in the Family, and the author is Farley Mowat. Who is Farley Mowat? Well, Farley Mowat actually died when he was in his 90s. He died in 2014, but he's a Canadian classic writer. His books have been translated into over 50 languages, and he sold over 17 million copies of his books worldwide. The great thing about Farley Mowat is he's Canadian. He was actually born in Ontario, and he was very concerned about the environment and nature. And this book is all about a boy who wants to have an owl for a pet. Now, come on. Would that make sense? I don't think so, but it's a cool story in here. Now, let's remember this story took place over 50 years ago. So the language in this story is a little different. There's some words we don't understand. There's even a little bit where the boy is going to play with his father's gun. Very different than today. So we're going to talk about the differences between a classic book like this and what we would expect today as well. So let's begin on chapter 1. Now, some of your books look a little different. That's okay. There are 11 chapters in this book, and the story is about a boy named Billy. And in chapter 1, we're going to be introduced to his friend Bruce. They are outside. They live in Saskatchewan, which is one of our prairie provinces, very flat land, different types of landform. You're going to hear about a landform called a bluff, which is, again, the type of landform near a stream or a river, and these boys are out just having fun. So if you can turn to chapter 1 and get ready, we're going to read together. Glasses. One Monday morning, my friend Bruce and I went for a hike on the prairie. Spring was late that year in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Snowdrifts still clung along the steep banks of the river, in the shelter of the cottonwood trees. The river was icy with thaw water, and as we crossed over the railroad bridge, we could feel the cold breath rising from it. That's a personification, so breath coming from a river. Remember when we talked about how something humanistic comes from a piece of nature, so breath from a river, that's a good example. I interrupted myself, you know how that goes. But we felt another breath, a gentle one, blowing across the distant wheat fields and smelling like warm sun shining on soft mud. It was the spring wind, and the smell of it made us walk faster. We were in a hurry to get out of the city and into the real prairie, where you can climb a fence post and see for about 1 billion miles. Million miles. Guess I exaggerated. That's how flat the prairie is. The great thing about Saskatoon was the way it ended sharp all around its edge. There were no outskirts to Saskatoon. When you stopped off the end of the railroad bridge, you stepped right onto the prairie, and there you were, free as gophers. Gophers were the commonest thing on the prairie. The little mounds of yellow dirt around their burrows were so thick, sometimes it looked as if the fields had yellow measles. But this day, Bruce and I weren't interested in gophers. We were looking for an owl's nest. We had decided that we wanted some pet owls. And if you want pet owls, you have to find a nest and get the young ones out of it. Boys and girls, that sounds terrible. Don't try this at home. We headed for the nearest of the clumps of cottonwood trees that dot the prairies, which are called bluffs, a landform, out in Saskatchewan. The ground was spongy under our sneakers, and it swooshed when we hit a wet place. A big jackrabbit bounced up right under my feet and scared me so much I jumped almost as high as he did. And as we came nearer the bluff, 2 crows came zooming out of it and swooped down upon us, cawing their heads off. Bluffs are funny places in the spring. The cottonwood trees shed a kind of white, fluffy stuff that looks like snow. Sometimes it's so thick it comes right over top of your sneakers, and you get a queer feeling that you really are walking through snow, even though there's sun on your back and it's making you sweat right through your shirt. We walked through this bluff, scuffing our feet in the cottonwood snow and snurring it up like clouds. We kept looking up, and after a while, sure enough, we saw a big mess of twigs high up in the poplar. Poplar is a kind of tree. "All right," Bruce said to the two crows, which were swooping and hollering at us. "If you want me to snitch your eggs, I will." With that, he handed me his haversack and began to shinny up the tree. Are you wondering what a haversack is? Do you think you can tell from this picture? Do you think it's over here? It was an easy climb because cottonwood poplars always had lots of branches. When he got to the nest and looked into it, I yelled up at him, "Any eggs?" Bruce grinned, but he wouldn't answer. I could see him doing something with his free hand, the one he wasn't holding on with, and I knew there were eggs there all right. I watched, and sure enough, he was popping them into his mouth so he could carry them down under the tree. Boys and girls, he put owl's eggs in his mouth. Wow. We always carried eggs down out of trees that way. The only thing was, crow's eggs are pretty big, and if you have to stuff 3 or 4 of them into your mouth, it nearly chokes you. So it's not owl eggs, it's crow eggs. Did we notice that? Okay. Bruce started to climb down. When he got about 10 feet from the ground, he stepped on a rotten branch. Poplar branches are always rotten near the ground, and you have to watch out for them. I guess Bruce forgot. Anyway, the branch broke, and he slid the rest of the way and lit on his seat with a good hard bump. All the eggs had broken. Ew. And Bruce was spitting out shells and eggs all over the cottonwood snow. I got laughing so hard I couldn't even talk. When Bruce got most of the eggs spat out, he came for me and tackled me, and we had a fight. It didn't last long because it was too hot to really fight. So Bruce ate a sardine sandwich to get the taste of crow's eggs out of his mouth, and then we started across the prairie again to search through other bluffs until we found an owl's nest. Now, boys and girls, I'm going to pause for a minute and talk about this. These are boys playing about 50 years ago in the prairies. Totally different playing than we would do. You've been taught to never touch a bird's nest, never go near it, never touch the eggs, because you know that the mother bird won't come back to her nest. So we wouldn't want to play like this. But things were really different a long time ago. Let's continue. I guess we searched about 100 bluffs that morning, but we never saw an owl. We were getting hungry by then, so we made a sort of nest for ourselves on the ground, out of poplar snow and branches. We curled up in it and opened our haversacks. You're beginning to understand what a haversack is? Do you think it's the same thing as a backpack? Bruce had sandwiches and a lemon in his. He was the only boy I knew who liked to eat lemons. He said they were better than oranges any day of the week. I had a hard-boiled egg, and just for fun, I reached over and cracked the shell on Bruce's head. Boys and girls, that sounds like Ramona, doesn't it? He yelled, and we had another fight and rolled all over his sardine sandwiches. We were just finishing our lunch when a wood gopher came snuffling along through the cottonwood snow. Wood gophers are gray and have big bushy tails. This one came right up to us, and when I held a crust out to him, he shuffled up and took it out of my hand. "Got no sense," said Bruce. "You might have been a coyote. And then where'd he be at?" Now here it says the word heck. And boys and girls, I don't like to use that word, so I'm not going to read that word, okay? He's got more sense than you. Do I look like a coyote? The gopher didn't say anything. He just took the crust and scuttled away into his hole somewhere. We picked up our haversacks. The sun was as bright as fireworks, and the sky was so clear you could look right through it, like looking through a blue window. We started to walk. All of a sudden, Bruce stopped so fast that he bumped into him. "Looky!" he said, and pointed to a bluff about half a mile away. There must have been a million crows around it. It looked as if the bluff was on fire and filling the sky with black smoke. That's how many crows were there. When you see a bunch of crows all yelling their heads off at something, you can almost bet it's an owl they're after. Crows and owls hate each other. And when a crow spots an owl, he'll call every other crow for miles, and they'll all join in and mob the owl. We headed for the bluff at a run. The crows saw us coming, and they were too excited to pay much attention. We were nearly deaf by the racket by the time we reached the edge of the trees. I was ahead of Bruce when I saw something big and slow go drifting out of one poplar into another. It was a great horned owl, the biggest kind of owl there is. And as soon as it flew, the whole lot of crows came swooping down on it, cawing in a fury. Can you caw like a crow? Caw, caw, caw. I noticed they were careful not to get too close. Bruce and I started to hunt for the nest. After a while, the owl got more worried about us than the crows, and away he went. He flew low over the fields, almost touching the ground, the way the crows couldn't dive on him. If they tried it, they would shoot past him and crash into the dirt. There wasn't any owl's nest in that bluff after all, but we didn't worry. We knew the nest would have to be in some bluff not too far away. All we had to do was look. We looked in different bluffs all afternoon. We found 7 crow's nests, a red-tailed hawk's nest, 3 magpies' nests. I tore the seat of my trousers. That means pants. Trousers, climbing into a hawk's nest. And we got Russian thistles in our sneakers, so we had sore feet. It got hotter and hotter, and we were so thirsty. I could have eaten a lemon myself, except that Bruce didn't have any more. It was past supper time when we started back towards the railroad. By then, we were pretending we were a couple of Arabs lost in a desert. Our camels had died of thirst, and we were going to die too unless we found some water really soon. "Listen," Bruce said. "There's an old well at Halton Corner. If we cut past Barney's Slough to the section road, we can get a drink." "Too late," I told him. "Goodbye, old pal, old sheik. I am doomed. Go on, leave me lay." It just means leave me alone. "Oh, nuts," said Bruce. "I'm thirsty. Come on, let's go." So we cut past Barney's Slough, and there were about 1,000 mallard ducks on it. They all jumped into the air as we went by, and their wings made a sound like a freight train going over a bridge. "I wish I had my dad's gun," said Bruce. Now, boys and girls, you know we would never play with guns. Back in these days, though, times were very, very different. But I was wondering why on the prairies they called lakes and ponds sloughs. I still didn't know why, but that's what they're called in Saskatoon. There was one big bluff between the old Halton Corner. It was too far to go around it, so we walked right through it. Anyways, it was cooler in among the trees. When we were about halfway through, I spotted a crow's nest in a big old cottonwood. "Bet it's empty," I said to Bruce. But the truth was, I was just too hot and tired to climb any more trees. Bruce felt the same way, and we walked past. But I took one last look up at it, and there, sticking over the edge of the nest, was the biggest bunch of feathers, of tail feathers you ever saw. My heart jumped right into my throat, and I grabbed Bruce by the shirt and pointed up. It was a great horned owl, all right. We kept as quiet as we could, so as not to scare her. And then we looked around the bottom of the tree. There were bits of rabbits and gophers, and lots of owl pellets. We're going to learn about that. When owls catch something, they eat the whole thing, bones and fur and all. And then after a while, they burp and spit out a ball of hair and bones, and that's an owl pellet. Boys and girls, if we get back to class, we're actually going to take apart owl pellets and see what's inside. So, hope we get back to class. By gang, we found it, Bruce whispered. I found it, I said. Okay, said Bruce, you found it then. So how about you climbing up and seeing how many young ones are in it? Nothing doing, old pal, I replied. I found the nest. So if you want one of the owlets, you climb up and have a look. Neither of us was keen to climb that tree. The old owl was sticking close to her nest, and you can't always tell how fierce an owl is going to be. They can be pretty fierce sometimes. Say, said Bruce after a while, why don't we just leave her for now? Might scare her into leaving the nest for good if we climbed up. What say we get Mr. Miller and come back tomorrow? Mr. Miller was one of our teachers. Bruce and I liked him because he liked the prairie too. He was a great one for taking pictures of birds and things. We knew he would be crazy to get some pictures of the owl, and Mr. Miller never minded climbing trees. Sure, I said. Good idea. We went off to Halton Corner and got a drink of water that tasted like old nails because it was out of a broken pump. Then we walked on home. That night I told Dad about the owl's nest, and he looked at Mother, and all he said was, oh no, not owls too.